so much to unpack for so many different reasons. Let's get started.
Another race for the world's greatest driver, Juan Manuel Fangio.
Former world champion Jim Clark leapt into the lead. That's Clark's Lotus going like a bomb.
And James Hunt is the world champion by just one single point.
By being a racing driver, you are under risk all the time. And if you no longer go for a gap that exists, you're no longer a racing driver.
And that is Michael Schumacher ahead, the world champion.
To become a four-time world champion, Sebastian Vettel, Lewis Hamilton, champion of the world.
That's for all the kids out there who dream the impossible.
Max Verstappen is champion of the world.
Oh my God! Max Verstappen, you are the world champion! The world champion!
I'm Tom Clabon, and as ever I'm joined by Tristan Fancourt and Angus Gallager. Today we look back at some parts of the Spanish Grand Prix and also look forward to the Canadian Grand Prix, which is coming up this weekend. So first of all, let's start with a teammate of Fernando Alonso, a driver who we've often criticised from time to time. No surprises, Lance Stroll. Now he beat his teammate for the first time this season. Is this a sign that things are changing? Is it time for us, or indeed you, Angus, to apologise?
I mean, only if Lance Stroll listened to this podcast and then felt justified enough to call me out on Twitter or something. To be fair, credit where credit's due. He has turned it round on this one occasion on this weekend. He performed well, 6th in qualifying. Credit to him, which became 5th once Gasly's penalties plural, were applied. Am I allowed to mention the caveat that Alonso messed up his lap, and that without messing up the lap would have beaten Stroll again? I probably am, but to be fair, you could also argue. It's too late for that. You could also argue if Alonso did mess up his lap, and therefore that's just a reflection of the qualifying that he had, because in the end it was a fair beating. It was half a second over Alonso that Stroll managed to ram home his advantage. So he really did make the most of that qualifying and the conditions that were there. In the race as well, backing it up, 6th place. Again, solid race. I think it was one of those classic Stroll solid races, if you know what I mean, where he actually, every now and again, even in his inconsistent years, he would occasionally turn up with a very solid performance, bag some good points, and he manages to look more accomplished than he perhaps usually would. And he definitely showed that in the race on, last Sunday now, a couple of weeks ago. Is this a turnaround? I don't know. You've still got to bear in mind the fact that Alonso came up behind him at the end of the race, and very un-Alonso-like, he came up behind him and said, I won't fight for P6. I'll just hold station behind Lance. And I know they would have got the same amount of points anyway, because the gap to Sainz ahead was too far to bridge. But still, very magnanimous gesture from Alonso to not fight his teammate. Maybe he thinks that giving Stroll some confidence by letting him beat Alonso would be a good thing for the team in general. Maybe he knows that the team principal is Stroll's dad. Maybe he's wanting to do nice things like that to please him, hence why he's being so nice to him so far this year. But I'd be interested to hear your guys' thoughts. Do you think Stroll has turned a corner? Do you think that... I'm trying to think if there's a trend earlier on in his career of him like starting season slowly and then coming on strong. I want to say his debut season, he got that podium, didn't he, in Baku, after he was frankly pretty awful in the first few races. So what do you guys think? Do you think this is a sign of things to come, what happened in Catalonia?
It was very un-Alonso-like, wasn't it, just to give up place? Although, I think you made some excellent points there with regards to Alonso's, as I say, thinking behind coming on the radio and being like, there's no danger. But I think there's two reasons for it. One reason was because it earns him some significant brownie points with Papa Stroll, and also with Lance as well, because Lance has yet to beat Alonso on the track, and so it gives him that that confidence, and also signals to Lance and the rest of the team that, you know, if Alonso's behind, he's not going to make their lives difficult and have a paddy. So that answers that question, doesn't it? But at the beginning of the season, I think many reported and commented on the potential conflict between Lance and Alonso, and now we've had that question answered. What happens when Alonso's stuck behind Lance Stroll? Nothing. But it's not really meaningful at the moment because he's basically just throwing Lance some points, isn't he? And given that Alonso's so far ahead of Lance in the driver standings, yeah, it's, you know, a small sacrifice for what I would say is quite a big benefit. And on the last lap, Alonso was waving to the fans behind Stroll. so clearly he wasn't. And that was racing, by the way. Alonso was waving to the fans under racing speed behind Lance, just like, hello, here I am, you know. So I don't think he was pulling out full pace there. And I don't know, I didn't check Lance's on board, but I don't think he was also, you know, taking a step back, if you like, and just waving at the fans in enjoyment. So yeah, it was a bit bizarre that I don't know whether or not because I haven't checked ready for this, whether or not Stroll's performance has increased during previous seasons, but I do think that Stroll's performance is very sporadic. He has these kind of moments of excellent pace, and that's kind of it. He's very explosive in terms of, wow, where did that come from? But he's on pole position in Turkey. What? And then suddenly he'll be, you know, near the back and spinning out somewhere. And I miss the good old days of him going on to the race engineer being, Brad, it's not going very well, Brad. Fortunately, Brad's now gone, his old race engineer. So yeah, we don't have those excellent piece of radio anymore. But I think I said last time that Alonso and Stroll are making an excellent driver pairing, and I think all in all, Spain has proved that's definitely the case. And if anything, Alonso's more prepared than I thought to give Stroll the small ego boost that he might need whilst on the track, which I think is going to massively benefit their relationship, because I think Alonso wants that seat for a few years yet.
This relationship just seems all too good to be true, really. I mean, we look back at the Fernando Alonso-Esteban Ocon relationship, and granted that started off well, but you would never see Alonso doing that for Ocon the same he's doing for Lance Stroll here. And I do question whether this will continue when crunch time comes in, if you will, when they're fighting for points, both in the Constructors' Championship, and they've got a car in front of them, maybe in P2 or P3 that they can catch, and also Alonso's own driver championship in terms of where he's going to be, because I think it's no secret, really. It's no explosive statement for me to go and say that Alonso will beat Lance Stroll in the Drivers' Championship. But the question is, how can that be done without damaging Lance Stroll's confidence in the short term? Because naturally, as we say, the reason he's doing this is because he wants to go and keep a happy camp together moving forwards to Canada, where we know that the Aston Martin car, definitely from the season start at least, was very good on power circuits, Saudi Arabia being a strong example of that. And from what we're hearing as well, when it comes to Mercedes, maybe not such a positive outlook when it comes to this circuit coming up versus Spain and indeed Monaco in past. So a good strategic move, and I'm still wowed by how comfortable they are with one another, Fernando Alonso and Stroll, really, when it comes to them being like, oh, well, yeah, don't worry, here's the brake balance I'm using, there's no reason for you to be concerned or worried, I'm not going to overtake you. But I don't think that will last, and I don't think it will last as well, Lance Stroll beating Alonso on track, because without being too negative about him, he lost a place from qualifying to race. Meanwhile, Alonso gained a place, so it was a victory, but it was, dare I say, if you go and look at the actual capacity overall, more of a victory for Alonso after a poor start when it came to qualifying. Granted, Stroll was up 2 places, I believe, in lap 1, but that's very customary, really, to how he does. So, as with Perez, a driver we'll talk about a bit later, it's a question of consistency. Can this be a springboard? And I don't think it's going to be a springboard so much for Stroll, but it could be more so for Alonso and indeed Aston Martin as a more conglomerate unit. But what do we think? Is it not now or never time, but is it time now for Stroll to go and show consistency to make sure that he will retain that seat moving forwards regardless of who's above him? Because as we know, if he's going to keep dragging that team down, maybe the wrong use of words, but still, if he's not going to be beating Alonso or indeed matching him, then I don't think Aston Martin, the higher powers, will be too inclined to keep him on indefinitely, as his contract seemingly is.
Just very quickly on your Ocon point, do bear in mind that Ocon has been described as the loveliest man off the track, but an absolute animal on the track, and he is a very savage as a teammate, and he does not let anything go, which is why he had problems with Sergio Perez, Fernando Alonso, and we haven't seen the problems yet with Pierre Gasly, but we're very early in. So I'd say that actually, if you look at the way Ocon has a relationship with his teammates, I think I would say that's the issue with Alonso and Ocon, not necessarily it stemming from Alonso as much.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, just look at, in terms of Ocon, how he treats people on track, just look to his chop on Alonso in Spain when they were fighting for P7. An Ocon moved extremely late and almost took it. I'm amazed that an older version of Alonso would have reacted with more vigour, I'd say. Do you remember was it Bahrain all those years ago when he got pushed off the track by Rosberg, and there was that famous radio message saying, "You have to leave the space. You have to leave the space." I think Alonso these days was more measured in how he reacted. But in terms of Stroll, I think it's always an interesting discussion about his seat that you raised there, Tom, because for me, his seat is written in the stars and guaranteed for life almost, which is a weird situation to be in, but that's just the fact of the matter of his dad being team principal. Unless he's absolutely awful, then he'll be there, I think. That's just a fact of the matter. It'll be a case of who would they partner alongside him to get the best out of him. I genuinely see that as the interest of the team hierarchy, the team principals at Aston Martin, because Mike Crack also seems to be very much on board with that, and he's been praising how good Stroll is. Who was it? I think Juan Pablo Montoya. Remember him? He came out in the media and said how Stroll was such an underrated driver and that he had great potential. So I think that, I don't see that changing for me. Unless he's absolutely dreadful, then he will remain there for the foreseeable, genuinely.
Yeah, and I think Stroll is a real middle-of-the-road driver as well, and that isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just the plain old fact with Stroll is, I think he does have these excellent moments, but just will always linger in the midfield, and it will be where he ends up, and that's not a bad thing, because I would like to say he's very consistent on points as well, and that gives him consistency, but that's not always the case either. And certainly his inconsistency has only been forgiven because he is the son of Lawrence Stroll, who owns the team. And in any other team, you may be thinking, well, I don't think you'll be safe. And actually, that's just the fact of the state of the F1 at the moment, isn't it? When you can have these sort of super paid drivers. I guess, I'm going to say super paid because it's beyond a paid driver now, isn't it? It's no longer, daddy's giving me the money for my seat. It's daddy's bought the team to give me my seat. So we're in the next phase of this. But I would say that he has earned his seat more than other people we've had in Formula One. And he's consistently beat other, up-and-coming drivers. He's consistently beat people like Mick Schumacher. He's, beat, God help us, Mazepin when he was in there. And yes, they had a poor car, but Aston Martins weren't particularly great either, go back a year. So I would say that he's definitely earned his place as a competitive. And let's face it, he's still within the 107% rule, which means he can qualify and race, and he's had a couple of pole positions, a couple of podiums, great. But he will always be just middle of the road, and unfortunately, if that's good enough for Aston Martin, then that's all that really matters now. I think the only way he's going to be dropped, and I mean this, is if he loses that 107% rule. If he loses to that, if he can't qualify. As long as Lance is interested in that seat, he'll sit there. And I think that's just the way it is now, because he is, as I say, a super paid driver.
And before we move on or away from Aston Martin, the topic in its entirety, what do we make of their prospects going into Canada? We saw them do so well, as I mentioned earlier, at various speed circuits, power circuits before. Could we see a return to Verstappen, Perez, Alonso, 2 Aston Martins on the podium? Dare I dream?
Don't know. I think that Mercedes are just looking good at the moment. Literally, I think that could be the main stumbling block to Aston Martin making any gains in that category, because Canada is, despite being a street circuit, it's quite more traditional than the other street circuits. It's got a greater variety of corners. My only hope would possibly be, and checks weather, if there's any rain, because you've obviously had rain influenced proceedings in the last couple of weekends, more so in Monaco realistically, but they still happen to be that in Spain. And he checks the weather, and it is raining, to be fair, in Montreal this weekend. So maybe there is hope for a double podium. Who knows? Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, and Lance is good in the rain though.
Yep.
He is. He took a pole position.
Yeah, so that there is an opportunity there. I think the rain is a best opportunity, and that's. I think I'm going to keep saying that. Really, I think the issue is the formidability of Red Bull and Max being just brilliant all the time now. So I'm optimistic to say they could both get on the podium, but if I was being realistic, I would say that I think Alonso's got the best shot. And don't forget as well, the Mercedes form is back. So that's just something to consider when we're assessing that. But we know they're quick, and I think Alonso is on the sort of another peak of his career. He keeps having, I guess, his mapping of his performance is like a mountain range at this point. It reflects the Pyrenees, and so he's at another sort of peak, a new level at Aston Martin. So I think he'd get on the podium. Lance, I'm not so sure, but it's his home race, and what I'd say is never underestimate the power of your home race and the atmosphere to propel you on further than you perhaps think you can. Lewis Hamilton often credits his successes at Silverstone to the fact that he had the fans cheering him, and he's I'm going to really go for it this time. What excuse Charles Leclerc has in Monaco, I'll never know. But I guess he just gets Ferrari'd, right? But so we know that Canada's fast, but Canada is unforgiving. Never forget the wall of champions, and many a champion has slammed into that final corner and ruined their lap, and so Lance Stroll pushing just a little bit too hard, maybe championed himself by that infamous wall.
And moving up the grid then to Red Bull, or to one of their drivers specifically, we're going on to Sergio Perez. Another mistake really in qualifying when it came to Spain. He qualified in 11th, rose to P4 to his credit, and it was really, when we're looking at this race in comparison to the others, the all too familiar pattern of Sergio Perez's career so far at Red Bull, at least, of win then drift, really. Look sort of post Azerbaijan or indeed Miami, and there's been some good performances, then the same old mistakes, really. What do we make of his performances after there was talk of a championship battle? Is a championship battle on? Because probably the biggest proponent of that, is starting to see that maybe that dream is slowly dying.
And when did this realisation hit you, Tom?
It was post Miami. I think it was after the horrendous qualifying at Monaco, and indeed the poor result after that for him. P16, no points, nothing. Followed by a P4. As I say, it's the same old pattern really for Sergio Perez, because he does have great purple patches, but they're normally followed by mediocre patches. So the question for me was, would he use it as a springboard to be not as consistent as Max Verstappen, because I think that's not impossible, but to challenge him week in, week out. And we're seeing at the moment with Verstappen being unstoppable at times, getting P1 and only losing to his teammate in 2 occasions, that you need to be in and around there in every race, otherwise the chance is pretty much gone. And 2 poor races there. Yes, I count a P4 finish as being poor in the grand scheme of things, and it's slipping away, isn't it, really? So Yeah, that's my summary.
Yeah, that's a very good summary, and it's a quick overview there of, I think, the difference, the delta that Perez has at the moment is crazy. Monaco just was a disaster for him, and then we thought, right, well, that wasn't good, but I guess that's a one-off, and then we go to Catalonia and we go to Spain. You think, oh no, not again,
not again.
And I think the thing is, it's going to be unacceptable to Red Bull, and I think P4 is going to be unacceptable to Red Bull. They're going to be looking at the fact that they've got a car at the moment which is above and beyond everyone else, and they're going to be hit by upcoming penalties because they cannot be able to develop it. And Perez has crashed the car in Monaco and revealed their flaw, and then he went off in Catalonia and sort of damaged it, and it almost had to be lifted again, and you could just see the Red Bull pit wall. Adrian Newey's looking at it thinking, don't you dare lift my car. It's not again. And Christian Horner having words with him after is not good. But I think this is an exact repeat of last year. It feels to me like a repeat. We've watched this episode before. It's like watching Top Gear and Dave. I've seen this one. It's just a repeat. He had that excellent performance last year. He got within a few points of Max Verstappen, and everyone went, "Oh, we could be having a fight here." And Perez even says, "I'm in it for the championship," and then he gets in his own head, and that's it. Off he goes. And backwards he goes. And so I think he's going to be, I don't know, under threat perhaps from Fernando Alonso and Aston Martin if he keeps this up, because there's only 18 points in it. And Sergio seems to have either he's incredible or he seems to have terrible. Like he used to get this, meet in the middle. And I don't think Red Bull will care if he comes in second. I mean, that's the best he can do, right? But I think that's what they'll be targeting him. His contract will have targets in it. They'll say, look, the minimum you need is this. This is how many points we're expecting from you. And they have been laying down their hand early by extending his contract and giving him a long-ish contract. But Sergio will have to meet that, because never forget that there is no contract which cannot be ended early.
As we found out last year with Ricciardo. Yeah.
Absolutely. Is the championship over? Well, you know my thoughts on this. There was a bit of a false hope after, let's say, Azerbaijan, when Perez was quick, and it was the moment. It's almost like the moment he said that he can fight for the championship and that he could, be a contender this year. Is ironically the very few moments he stopped fighting for the championship and stopped being a contender, which is so unfortunate. So since Azerbaijan, that victory, Verstappen has got 76 points in 3 races, 3 wins in a row, and Perez has got 30. So I think it shows you the massive swing that's happened since that race, especially when Perez got pole in Miami and Verstappen was 9th, and you thought, oh my God, something is actually happening here. But then Verstappen absolutely steamrolled through the race, took an easy win. Perez had a massive... If Perez is going to have one place to have an off weekend, it shouldn't be Monaco, where you reduce your chances of being able to come back through the field or be able to make ground up. But he did, and then that's kind of gone off the boil there. And then in Spain as well, going out in Q2, it's just, it's all fallen apart. His future will be fine, I think, because he's part of Red Bull's wider plan. I think they're actually pretty happy at the success of having both Verstappen and Perez, 2 top-level drivers. Helmut Marko was asked this week about reports that Red Bull are on the verge of sacking Perez if his performance doesn't improve, which seems ridiculous.
Bit early.
Yeah, and that's nonsense.
And Helmut Marko said, absolutely not. He's part of our plan to finish first and second in the Drivers' Championship and to finish first in the Constructors' Championship. And that's absolutely fair enough. I mean, you can see why they've actually, after a few years of having younger drivers who didn't quite fit the bill, they've actually now got drivers who, one who we already knew was exceptional, but a backup driver who is able to support the main driver suitably and carries the experience to bring home wins, pole positions, etc., and strong performances. So I think they're just grateful to have that, if I'm honest with you, and I don't see any change happening in that. But at the same time, I don't see any change in the championship circumstances where, realistically, Perez will be a backup act to make sure that the constructors gets wrapped up in the shortest amount of time possible.
It's incredible how a year or so ago, when Perez first came into Red Bull, we said P4 is minimum really for him in the battle against Mercedes, but with there being a vacuum really of opponent, P4 is now redundant really when you're against Max Verstappen, who seems to win by simple ease every single race. So here's a question for you. We've answered the championship question to a point. Is another car going to win a race this season? Because the probability is yes, but we're 6 races down, 17 to go, and at least one Red Bull is unstoppable, and the other one is normally thereabouts, plus a massive gap from Red Bull to Aston Martin, Mercedes, Ferrari, and the rest. What do we think?
Yeah, I think it's definitely possible, and I don't think I don't know if it's possible to have an ultimate consistency of one team across every single race, and I would like to think that the current state of F1 means that we won't fall into that particular basket case scenario, because there is weather, there is unreliability issues, there is other drivers, and oh god, we didn't know how good we had it, right, when we used to have a mixture of Tsunoda in his early days, Grosjean, people like that bringing the excitement back onto the track. Latifi bringing us the drama during races that were boring. So, with a little bit of drama, it seems like it's possible for another team to win. And I mean, one of you will let me know whether or not a team has ever won all the races in a F1 season. But what I'm saying is that we have a lot of races, we have a lot of weather, and we have a lot of drivers. Surely at some point Red Bull won't win. And now that I've said that, it'll be this weekend, and I'm like, I think, because that's usually how it works, isn't it?
I'm able to tell you the exact answer to that. So the 2 occasions where it's come closest, 2016 was actually one of them. Remember the year where Verstappen won his first race? That was one of 2 races which Mercedes did not win that year. The other one being Daniel Ricciardo in Malaysia when Hamilton's engine blew up. But the most famous example, 1988. So the McLaren MP44. So McLaren had Ayrton Senna and Alain Prost, kind of a cheat code that, can't lie. But they won 15 out of 16 races. The only one they didn't win was the Italian Grand Prix, where Senna was leading with 3 laps to go before he was taken out by a lapped Williams car, and Ferrari came through to win with a 1-2. So at Monza. So that's the only time, and that was the only race that season. So McLaren took 15 out of 16 pole positions. They took 12 out of 16 fastest laps and 15 out of 16 wins. So, but other than those 3 laps, they won every race.
Wow.
Possible? Maybe. Who knows this year? I mean, you're right in that there'll be some
freak thing, right? Surely.
Freak thing. There has to be statistically, even though the only thing is that reliability is that 1988 win was at a time when reliability was nowhere, and you had an average of like 10 or 11 cars out of a grid of 25 would finish every race. So things were blown up all over the place. So for McLaren to produce a car that, well, they only retired in they retired 4 times out of 32 entries, which was very impressive for that time. Now reliability is more bulletproof than ever. Weather is perhaps more unpredictable because you get more bouts of rain, but we're also in an age where people forget that rain brings like excitement, right? But rain also, ironically, actually accentuates an advantage that the fastest team has, because if your grid order is based on aerodynamic grip, so if the fastest team has the best car with the most aerodynamics, that's only going to be enhanced in wet conditions where the grip is lower.
True.
If you get what I mean.
Yeah.
So that would arguably strengthen Red Bull's case. But statistically, it's Sod's Law or rule of averages, there must be at some point, there'll be something where there's a mess up, or there's like a reliability problem, or someone like Verstappen. Verstappen's not. He doesn't make many mistakes, but he's not immune to them. I mean, last year his mistakes didn't cost him. I remember I think it was Spain last year where he spun into the gravel, lost about 10 seconds, but then brought it back. Or was it Singapore last year where he had a bit of a stinker and came qualified poorly?
Yeah, but his qualifying like Singapore was because he was going to run out of fuel. Do you remember? He was on a good lap and they said, come in, and he goes, no, don't, why did you do that? And said, we'll talk to you after. And it was because they just underfueled him slightly. So, yeah.
Yes. So it's possible, but like, I don't, it's well, you'd think surely something will happen across 22 races that, you know, it would jeopardise Red Bull's 100% streak. Surely.
Yeah, Tom. And now, just linking this back to Perez slightly, we're on. So Red Bull has had 8 wins in a row. Surely this is going to put even more pressure onto Perez now, because Angus, you're right. That law of averages state will suggest that someone else at some point is going to be unreliability. Surely now, right? The 8 wins in a row. Red Bull are thinking, we want to keep this up. If something happens to Max, we need that second position covered so that it can go to first position and we still win. If Max is in first and Perez is in, let's say, 9th, and Max, crashes off for whatever reason, just something happens, they're going to be expecting Perez to be there to pick up that gauntlet and demonstrate that Red Bull this weekend we didn't need Max. We had Perez there to save the day. Now we're on 9 wins.
Yeah, agreed. I have to agree, but wasn't that why he was hired in the first place? It was to get rid of the unreliability of the second driver. No offence to Gasly, Albon, but it's to have an experienced head in there, somebody who knew what they were doing and could get the best out of the car and indeed their tyres. So the pressure will be on Perez, but dare I say, that was part of his job description, to be not quite Max Verstappen, but pretty damn close, don't you think?
So you don't agree with the sentiment that I've seen quite a lot at the moment, which is Perez is an average driver in a very good car.
No. There's no chance. I mean, if you watch back the season, his final season with Racing Point, where he won, I believe it was the Bahrain Grand Prix, Sakhir Grand Prix, that was absolutely excellent. And the reason why he was perhaps dumped out of Formula One was not because of quality or form or age or anything. It was because Lawrence Stroll wanted to bring his son into the team and decided, Perez, you can't possibly be in there with Sebastian Vettel. I've got to have a seat for my son. And ultimately it was the opening at Red Bull which allowed Perez to come in and do so well. And it hasn't gone perfectly, I'll admit, from his first season looking forwards. But I think Perez has done a pretty excellent job compared to the ones who came before him, really. It's very easy for Red Bull fans and for the critical eye in Formula One to look at Perez now and go, oh my goodness me, isn't he doing such an awful job getting P16 in Monaco and crashing? But compare that to how Alex Albon was doing, how Gasly was doing, even at times how Daniel Ricciardo was doing, because he wasn't bulletproof, really. So I think Perez is vastly underrated. I don't think he gets the credit he deserves, and it's only now people are starting to see how good he can be. But often he's not quite at that level all the time, as we've seen in the last 2 races. But hey, this may be his dip, and a purple patch may be coming up to see Red Bull ride through into the summer break having won all Grand Prix. I think that's distinctly possible.
Yeah, it's a shame that Perez has ruined the nice pattern we had going, because we had, I'll just read you the nice pattern. It was Max, Sergio, Max, Sergio, Max, Max, Max. So now we need like Max, Sergio, Max, Sergio, Sergio, Sergio.
Can we not
it's
have
possible.
someone different?
Yeah,
can we not have?
Possible.
Can we have Russell, Alonso, Leclerc? Actually no, Ferrari. No, take that back. Let's have a different set of. Sorry, I'm just hitting on Ferrari hitting Ferrari hard for no reason at all. But no, can we have a different set of winners, please? It would be nice. And just to close on the Perez point, I agree with Tom. His season at Racing Point in 2020 was excellent, and that was, I think, one of Perez's things which he probably will show again this year at some point. He has a lot of resilience. He's been twice in his career on the brink, effectively. I remember when he first went up to McLaren, the year after McLaren had a race-winning car, and then he joined them when they were dropped down into the midfield. he was excellent at Sauber, but then flopped a little bit at McLaren. But it was his first year, and they thought, it was like, well, give him another year. But they dropped him and brought in Kevin Magnussen instead because they thought he had the higher ceiling, which is ironic considering where the two of them now are. But then Perez was on the brink; he had no seat. Force India came in, saved his career, and then the same team got rid of him, sacked him 6 years later for no justified reason, realistically, and his career was on the brink. I remember when he won that race in Bahrain, he had the look of a man who just thought, finally, I've won a race, so if I actually don't drive ever again, I've at least achieved my life goal. And then he was given that second chance at Red Bull, and twice he's been back from the brink. So, yeah, he's definitely more that season proved that he was definitely more than just an average driver in a very good car, as to what some people would say. And who did he convincingly beat in that exceptional season? Oh, Lance Stroll, just to bring it all back around to the earlier points. So, yeah, solid driver, very solid driver. Definitely deserves more of a chance. He's got 6 F1 wins. I know some of those have been in a Red Bull, but he's not bad. He's only, who on the grid's got more wins than Perez? Only Bottas, Verstappen, Alonso, Hamilton, I think. So, yes, it's not a bad number at all.
And looking a bit further down the grid now to McLaren, it was an interesting weekend for them. P3 for Lando Norris in qualifying. Unfortunately, though, after he was, some would say, brake checked by Lewis Hamilton, he fell right down the order. And meanwhile, his teammate Oscar Piastri went from P19 to P13. So we've got Piastri with 2 points finishes and 2 bad results. We've got Norris with 3 points finishes and a P17 on numerous occasions. Interesting he's got that on multiple occasions, but there we go. Life's weird. So moving forwards then, what do we make of McLaren so far? They started off very poorly. Reasons for optimism, green shoots, or not so much?
So far this season they've gone through technical reshuffle. Well, actually, let's get right back to the start. Starting the season by walking out in January and going, yeah, we haven't met our upgrade target, lads. We haven't met our aerodynamic targets in the wind tunnel. So, not a great start. Then, all the stuff that came in the first few races. Like last year, a poor start where they were dead slow. Lando Norris finishing, like you say, I bet you, if he'd told you at the start of the season that he would be the driver who's finished 17th the most times, but with 4 of those 17th, he'd say to you, "You're kidding me? What's going on there?" But that's a fact. That's a fact. He still had a chance to show his undoubted talent in his 5th year now in F1. That qualifying in Spain was just, absolutely outstanding. To finish 3rd in that car, I think that I can say to finish 3rd in that car, because the fact that on race day, neglects the fact that sure he got that contact on the first lap with Lewis Hamilton, he dropped down the order, but he didn't make up much ground in the race hardly after that. Like to go from he was plumb last to then fight back to 17th shows that the car didn't really have it in it, and that I think that if the race had gone to plan and let's say he's 3rd after that start, he's probably still going to finish outside the top 10 as he pessimistically predicted after qualifying on the Saturday afternoon. In terms of Piastri, as we said before, I think he's doing a solid job. Not too bad. There's a lot of hype around him because of all the court case drama that happened last year. Kind of like a keeping up with the Alpines or the keeping up with the Piastris or something like that. Everything that happened last year is trying to prise him from that contract. So I think for him, time will come and he will be able to show his potential as the year goes on. But he's made a decent start considering the calibre of opposition in his own team, because I think it's easy to forget how good Lando Norris is with the cars that have been provided to him over some years. And I think for McLaren, this just represents, we talk about, it's an obvious step back from 2021, where behind Red Bull and Mercedes you had Ferrari, McLaren, and then probably Pierre Gasly and on occasion Fernando Alonso fighting for those like top 5 positions behind the Red Bull and the Mercs. So it's a definite drop back from that, let alone drop back from last year, where he still came on the podium at Imola and he was still putting up good results. He was still putting up solid performances. I mean, last year in the end of the season, when it came to the final points total. He ended up with 122 points. Can it be said that he will get anywhere near that this year? I don't think it can, because he's just stuck in an absolutely horrible car with a team that has tied him down to a multi-year contract for a team that he supposedly has utmost faith in that they will turn it round, and yet McLaren keep producing this for him. So I know we've banged the drum of the topic of his patience running out plenty of times in the past, but yes, McLaren in total, or in contrast, green shoots, question mark, to refer back to your original point, possibly, because 2 cars in the top 10, solid. Piastri could have done better. He had a mistake on his lap, could have been 7th or 8th, then you're looking at a 3rd and a 7th maybe. But the car's just not good at all. It's extremely average. They're lagging behind even Alpine, who were considered to have a poor start to the season. Yeah, I know Tristan has some thoughts on this one, so I think I'll leave the floor to him.
Thanks, Angus. Yeah, I don't know. I think you seem to be... There is general optimism, I think, but I disagree with that optimism. And I'm not because I'm pessimistic, but again, I'm just centering myself in realism of what we saw in Spain. And it was a bad sign when Lando Norris came on the radio when they said, P3, and he goes, wait, still? And that's the bad sign, isn't it? And then he said, how are you gonna hold on? I'm holding on for dear life. And we saw him get swallowed up, not actually because it's his own fault, really. Shouldn't have got swallowed up by the rest of the pack in the race that quickly. But the fact is they just aren't getting to where they need to be at the moment. And when you look at the races as well, then the amount of points, right? They had that Australia moment where Lando Norris qualified P13 and ended up in P6, and that was like, oh, is this a green shoot? And then Azerbaijan 2 points, Miami 0 points. So they have these, I don't know, odd moments where things work in their favour. And they interviewed Zach Brown, right, CEO, and asked him, well, what made qualifying so special? And he said just everything was perfect. It was the perfect weather for us. We had that limited tyre degradation. The tyres were working as well as they possibly could for us. And that's why they got to where they were. It just so happened at that very moment, everything was right for McLaren to get that position. And the next day, you're not racing at the same time in the same conditions, and they predict they'd fall backwards, and that's exactly what happened. And I don't think that the scale of McLaren's failure to push forward has necessarily been demonstrated yet. I just want to tell you this. So if you just compare some of the races last year, so let's take Miami. Right, Miami's a good one because I think this exemplifies McLaren's issues perfectly. Sergio Perez in last year's Red Bull qualified in 4th with a 129.0, and Max on a qualifying 3rd with a 128.991. Okay, so let's take Max's time as like the upper echelons of where that Red Bull car was last year. Yeah, 128.9. This year in Miami, Sergio Perez qualified that Red Bull with a time of 126.8, which is obviously a massive chunk of time out, a couple of seconds. Then we look at Norris, and Lando Norris qualified in 2023 with a time of 128.3, and in Miami last year he qualified with a 129.7. So McLaren have only taken 0.6 out of their pace from last year to this year. So Red Bull's taken 2 seconds, McLaren's taken half a second. And that's why I don't think there's green shoots, because that's the data. That's what we've been told. And that pairs up perfectly with what we've been told by Zach Brown, what Lando Norris has been saying, I'm going to get swallowed up. Yeah, they are going to get swallowed up because they just haven't taken the step forwards that basically other teams have. And that's the difficulty that they've got at the moment. They're spending more time having these sponsor changing plates on the side of their car, I think, than developing something that's going to go into their car. I mean, wonderful that they could use e-ink to develop those sponsorship plates. Fantastic. Great. I guess they can say to companies now, oh, for the first 20 laps we'll have your sponsorship on the car, and then 20 more laps we'll have someone else's. So you can buy parts of a sponsorship now, so you don't have to sponsor the whole race. Yeah, very clever way to do things. If they wanted to do that, McLaren, that's a free idea for you. At the moment they're only utilising it for chrome, but doesn't detract from the fact that they are just not where they need to be. And perhaps I'm going to say it's because of more investment in their sponsorship than it is in pushing the car forward and pushing that team forward, because of poor management. And it's that poor management that we've heard about from employees there, and now we've had people leaving, restructures. So to be honest, I don't think it's green, I don't think it's in the red, I think it's sort of amber. It is exactly where it was. And they just got lucky on Saturday. Until they get lucky again, it's going to be, oh, there's McLaren backwards. You know, we'll come back to this after Canada, Tom, because I'm willing to bet you right now that McLaren will have a pretty average, if not poor, Canada race, and it'll prove me right. What do you have to say to that?
Yeah, I think they will. To start with, I don't think that McLaren are having an excellent season by any stretch of the imagination, but I think it's improved from the near cataclysmic point it was at the start of the season. And what I'm saying there is I think their qualifying place and the fact they've got Oscar Piastri, who has been quietly doing quite a good job in quite an average car, is reasons to be optimistic if you're trying to be, really. If you're looking at Monaco, for example, P10, P11, both drivers finishing close together, different from what we've seen before in terms of Daniel Ricciardo and Lando Norris, granted further back than before. A P3 as well, good qualifying pace, and it's not what they want. I fully accept that. It's not what McLaren are aiming for, and it's a clear step backwards. But as we've seen in previous Grand Prix seasons, I think back to Ferrari from 2021 as being a good one for this. Qualifying pace at certain circuits can do you wonders and can be helpful for you. So that's a reason in my mind why they should be more optimistic than before. But as I say, they were stepping over a bar that was pretty much in the dirt, really. And when you look at the circuits they've done well on when it comes to qualifying, and indeed when it comes to races as well, it's more street circuits, it's more tight, twisty corners, with some exceptions, Azerbaijan being one. So in answer to your question, do I think they'll be doing rather well at Canada? No, I do not, because there's a huge gaping straight at the start of the lap, indeed, going from Q1 to Q2, or Sector 1 to Sector 2. So it's going to be another painful race, but I think it's far better than it could have been, really. They could be down there with Williams and down there with AlphaTauri. Not saying it's a victory not to be like that, but perhaps things aren't as cataclysmic as they first were, and that's the small victories they've got to take, in my view. So looking forwards then to the next Grand Prix, as mentioned there, it's in Canada, the Canadian Grand Prix. We understand, speaking now at least, it will be going ahead despite the wildfires happening in North America at the moment. So first of all then, Tristan, who needs to do well, aside from McLaren, at this Grand Prix coming up?
Well, McLaren needs to do well, but aside from McLaren, I think this is Aston Martin's chance for Lance Stroll to get his sort of dream of a win at his home Grand Prix. Never underestimate the power of a home crowd, and this will be a fantastic opportunity for him in a very, very good car to get on the podium, try and repeat that feat for him, and demonstrate to the crowd that last week wasn't just a fluke beating Alonso, even if Alonso let him win, but it was a sign of things to come as he propels himself and that team forward. And I think it will be really great for Aston Martin as well if they can get a fun bit of success during the home Grand Prix for Lance Stroll, given that they had a lot of fun with the home Grand Prix for Fernando Alonso. Now it's Stroll's turn to have the Canadian limelight on him, and I think if it is wet weather, then Aston Martin have an excellent chance. It is a track that's notorious for being very, very dangerous. It has that notorious wall of champions at the very end, which in the wet is exaggerated even further, and it can be very problematic. In fact, actually, even apparently the pit lane can be a problematic thing for cars if Yuki Tsunoda's incident last year has anything to go by. So if it's in the wet, anything can happen, and I think Lance Stroll is going to do well and be on the podium.
Angus.
Scenes. I think that, yeah, I mean, we can hope for rain, and we saw last year A bit of rain in qualifying produced a nice couple of shocks in Canada, especially Alonso in his Alpine getting on the front row in a car which was realistically the 5th fastest or 4th fastest. You had Magnussen and Schumacher also finishing 5th and 6th in qualifying that day, so it really was a day for surprises. But I would say that Perez might pull it back and win this one. It is a street circuit after all, so I think that may show his strength. I think Verstappen is going to crash out of this one because the rain might be too much for him to handle, and the pressure, which he definitely doesn't think about, but I'm going to pretend like he does, of potentially equalling the number of race victories of Ayrton Senna this weekend, 41 in a career, which would be a momentous occasion for him to, or a momentous milestone, for him to tick off. So the other podium finishers will be Lewis Hamilton. He loves Canada. He's won there, I want to say 6-7 times, possibly. And then I think the third driver on the podium will be Charles Leclerc.
Interesting. I think a team that need to do well and will do well, you've mentioned them just there, Angus, Haas. Because you have to go back quite a while for a good Haas performance, be that from one driver or two drivers, particularly looking at the Spanish Grand Prix and indeed Monaco. So hopefully with there being more sort of power and speed at this circuit versus the last two, that can unleash the shackles of Haas's car and they can go up in the championship really. Because looking at the gap between them and the aforementioned McLaren, only 9 points, and if they replicate the qualifying from last year and make it pay in the race, then you never know, they could do it all in one go or bear down on them even further for a cool P6 in the Constructors, which, well, not bad at all, is it? And on that prediction bombshell, that seems that's all we've got time for in terms of episode 17 of F1 in Review 2023. Thank you very much for listening all the way to the end of this one, be that on your preferred podcast provider or indeed elsewhere. A reminder, you can follow us on Twitter and on TikTok, handle being F1 in Review. So, as I mentioned there, the Canadian Grand Prix, fingers crossed, searching a wood around, will go ahead this weekend. If you're watching, listening or observing qualifying in the UK at British summertime, that's 9pm, that's 9pm if you're observing in the UK, and then the race on Sunday, once again if you're in the UK, that is 7pm, so an evening racing qualifying, an evening of F1 for us all hopefully moving forward. So we'll see lots of racing, lots of thrills, lots of spills, and lots for us to discuss moving forwards in the next episode when we return next week. So thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next week.